that's day one down, and it was a good one. We saw 4 movies, and despite the downpour that we were greeted to there at the beginning, we had to like run to Marshall's, which is right next to the main theater, to get new socks and new hoodies and stuff just to like warm up. We even had to return to the room at one point. But it was a good day of film viewing. We can't really do more than like 4 movies in a day. And I think if you try, you're just wearing yourself out and eventually going to reach brain rot. But I feel like at least 3 of the 4 movies we saw were very good. I think one of them was excellent. And I'll talk about that first really fast. That was Jafar Panahi's It Was Just an Accident, which is this kind of like revenge movie about a guy who was tortured by this, I guess, this member of the regime there in Iran, and he and a number of other people were part of like this supposed plot to overthrow the regime, and they were held in captive for years and years. Well, many years later, they run into this guy again just by happenstance, and or at least a guy they think is this guy. And it's it's really, really enjoyable and really like funny at times, like surprisingly so. It's one of the better Iranian films I've seen in some time, and right now it's probably the best movie I've seen this year, which is saying something because we've seen some really good movies. On top of that, we also saw Sentimental Value, a film by a director I like a lot named Joachim Trier. So it's a Scandinavian film. I went in with some pretty high expectations because I've really enjoyed his movies Oslo, August 31st, and The Worst Person in the World. I think this movie is a step down from those. It has a lot going for it, and I think it is it has like a really cool sort of like structural things, especially in terms of how it handles things like flashbacks. And I really enjoyed how that movie tackles this idea of like the artist and his seeming invincibility, and how like that bounces up against the reality of things like family life and or aging, etc. And I liked that, but I feel like it gets really conventional in places that make the film drag a little more. And so it's like a solid B for me. Like if it were to win an Oscar for the best international feature, I wouldn't be upset or anything because I think Trier deserves all his flowers. But I was a little disappointed. We also saw a really cool movie called Sirat. This movie is basically like a father goes to Morocco, and he's searching for his daughter who has gone missing in a series of raves, and so he's exploring like sort of like the rave culture there in Morocco. He and his son hook up with like this group of like EDM people, ravers and whatever the heck you call them. And they go into even deeper into the Mauritania to like try and go to another rave down there. And he thinks his daughter might be there. And this movie, like, it is a sucker punch, man, to say the least. It also has some like really cool thematic resonance in terms of like how the director tries to tie in like that Burning Man culture with sort of religiosity. And my partner compared this movie to a previous TIFF breakout called How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which was like this really big sort of political polemic film that I loved and was like a really terse thriller. This has similar sort of political radical leanings, and I think that is a movie that, like, if you've got patience for its first like 15 minutes, the rest of it really just like begins to sing. Just be ready because it can be very devastating and is very devastating at times. But I really, really came to dig it, and I keep thinking about it the more I think about it, which is really good. And then the last one we saw, this movie called Exit 8, which was kind of a toss-off movie. It's like a video game adaptation, and I just thought that was a big piece of doo-doo. It was pretty bad. Should have stayed a video game adaptation. Didn't have much of a story, and it just kind of felt like I wasted my time. But, you know, hey, 3 out of 4 ain't bad. On to day 2.
No other choice. No other choice.
So day 2, it's over, and I forgot to record this last night because we didn't get in until about 2:30 after Midnight Madness, which you just saw a clip of. So yeah, let's talk about what we saw on our second day at TIFF. First up, we saw a film called Blue Heron, which is kind of like the local Canadian filmmaker making good here at the festival. We kind of got a lot of good advanced word, so we went and checked it out. I thought it was a pretty tender film. It touches on a family that's dealing with oppositional defiant disorder in one of the siblings. And the first half is very intimate and very warm, and I think it's a very pleasant sort of film to watch. The second half, I think, is less so, and is kind of where I ended up feeling a little more mixed on the film overall. Most likely it's not a movie you're gonna see unless it like ends up getting like wider distribution. So it doesn't really matter, but just for posterity's sake, I'm talking about that movie. The second movie we saw was Park Chan-wook's No Other Choice, which is his latest film that follows up on big great masterpieces like Decision to Leave and The Handmaiden, and of course many people will know Old Boy. He's pretty much like the second most famous Korean director behind Bong Joon-ho. This movie is really, really timely and interesting. It's about a guy who has lost his job at a paper mill, and in order to find work in the current job market, he decides to knock out the competition, literally, by pulling together a bunch of resumes of all these guys that might be potential competition for another job, and he goes on a bit of a murder spree. It gets more twisty and turny as per Park Chan-wook tradition, but and I'm still percolating on how I feel about the movie overall in terms of his filmography, but I can tell you, bottom line, it's very good. And as my partner pointed out to me when we were leaving, it is for sure the most commercial film he's made, and that probably will fare well for his award prospects. It's also based on a really cool book that I'm reading right now by Donald Westlake, so more to be said on that later. Then we saw Maddie's Secret, which is the directorial debut of a guy named John Early, who I wasn't that familiar with, though it turns out I had actually seen him in stuff like I Think You Should Leave and Wet Hot American Summer. I apparently just completely blanked out that I ever saw him. But the movie's cool. It's like this very sincere take on a Lifetime original movie, and it deals with issues of like bulimia and food intake issues, and as well as just kind of like influencer culture within the food space, particularly Bon Appetit, and there's like the veiled references to things like The Bear, not so veiled really, but it's a really fun movie, and I think it's intermittently quite funny, as my partner and I discussed when we were leaving the film, the one issue is when you do something that's so sincere and kind of centered on that Lifetime original formula, it has the same highs and lows as one of those movies. But at the Q&A, John Early talked about how Showgirls was a huge influence on the film, and because of that, I gave it an extra half star because he called that movie a masterpiece, and it is. And then the last thing we saw at Midnight Madness was Obsession by Curry Barker. He is a Alabama filmmaker who is making his debut here at the festival. This movie's awesome, man. It's like something ripped straight out of EC Comics, where a guy is super hung up on one of his friends, decides that he wants to wish that she is obsessed with him and loves him more than anything else in the world. And let me tell you, that goes very wrong, and it gets really, really nasty. And it is a very effective piece of horror filmmaking. There's a jump scare that made my partner jump out of her seat, which she does not generally do that often. And I think whoever picks up that movie, whatever distributor does it, Shudder, someone bigger than that, they've got a real banger on their hands, and I think that's a movie to really be on the lookout for. Anyway, TIFF Day 3, we're on their way, and we're heading on to the next one, so here we go. Made it to the Knives Out premiere, and I'm up here in this balcony. Should see some stars here. I'm now at the end of day 3, and I'm really starting to feel the kind of general exhaustion. I only saw 3 movies today. I was really originally going to see 4. I was going to see 1, The Testament of Anne Lee, at 9 a.m. today, and after the long 2 a.m., 2:30 a.m. return to the hotel room, I was just like, no way. I was also just worried I might be getting a little sick from, festival crud, kind of like con crud. But instead, I woke up feeling a little lot better. We went out, got our brunch on, and then headed on to see 3 films. The first of which was a movie called Retreat. It was sort of interesting. Like it was the first movie. It advertised itself as the first deaf thriller. Deaf, D-E-A-F thriller, and it was all in, I guess, British Sign Language, not instead of American Sign Language, so BSL. And I thought this was a very noble attempt at making a new kind of approach to a pretty well-worn genre. The problem is the script's pretty bad, and for a thriller, it doesn't really have many thrills, and it kind of cheats its way to like big sort of suspense-ridden scenes with just like musical swells when things aren't really that earned. It's like people are walking into a door and suddenly the music is raising up, and it's just like that doesn't even make sense in the scene as written. But I just thought it was like kind of a mess. There were just a lot of things that I think probably should have been chipped away in like a second draft. But for whatever reason, somebody didn't want to kill their darlings, and the film is just kind of a mess. I wouldn't say it's the worst thing we saw at Fest yet. I still think Exit 8 was worse just because I think its politics were so noxious, but it was pretty bad. Then we followed it up with a film called At the Place of Ghosts, which is a First Nations movie from here out of Canada. Independent production, kind of a cool idea. I mean, it's really well worn, even to the point where like you'd see it in like books like Ghost Story or The Only Good Indians, or even my book Taking Root. Like it's one of these things where the whole plot is centered on, we did something really bad 10 years ago and now it's coming back to haunt us. You know, it's that thing that's almost cliche at this point. And I think the filmmaker does a nice job, presenting like these two brothers that are dealing with like this terrible thing they did in the woods when they were kids. And there's some cool magical realist elements. The issue is that the movie's really languid, and it feels like it's trying to be like this really brilliant sort of independent look at reality and time and spirituality, and like it feels like it's trying to like have like a deeper exploration than the material's actually allowing it to have, because really it's just kind of like a horror / crime film with some speculative elements thrown throughout, which I think are pretty cool. But the movie also looks really cheap. Like Hannah, she told me afterwards that like she felt like it looked like a Shudder original, and it kind of does. It's the kind of movie that like it's too slow to actually ever show up on Shudder, but it is totally in the wheelhouse aesthetically. It's one of these movies that I appreciate the attempt more than I actually enjoyed the movie. But it was a passion project for the director. You're just going to run into that kind of thing at festival. And then the big one, you guys saw the footage of the new Knives Out movie, Wake Up Dead Man. And, the crowd around me seemed to really dig it, but I was the cheese that stands alone on that. I thought this movie was kind of a big piece of poop. I don't know, guys. Like, I am really resistant to Rian Johnson's whole thing for the most part. I don't want to like get into like the politics of it too much, but like he's got like this kind of milquetoast liberalism that's real smug, and I'm a liberal. Like I'm probably more left than he is, frankly. But I don't know. There's just something about his approach that really puts me off, and I feel like in these Knives Out movies, that's where he really like highlights all of that. And that's fine. I'm used to it, whatever jokes against, the Republican regime you want to do, that's fine. I don't care. It was just not my thing, but whatever. But then like, I keep hoping these mysteries will get better and like the storytelling will get better, because I do actually like Daniel Craig in this role. And there is clearly like a strain of Poe and Chesterton, Chesterton influence in this character played by Josh O'Connor, who's kind of like a Father Brown stand-in. So you've got like some pretty cool like source material-ish to play around with. And I just think the film makes mincemeat of it. I could describe the plot, but you guys are gonna see it anyway, so what's the point? I feel like the movie's really messy. It has like clearly, to me, like the most thinly drawn characters in the entire series so far, Blank aside, who's not even the star of the movie, by the way. Josh O'Connor's character is actually the star of the movie. And as appealing as those two guys are together, I think they make probably the best like duo of the series. Everything else around them is just a big nothing. And like the plottiness, oh my God, it's just like, I was having trouble keeping up, and I read a lot of crime novels, and a lot of mystery novels too, and detective stuff, and I was just like, what's going on? What's happening? Even to the point where like Benoit Blanc is, commenting on this stuff, and I felt like I was drowning a little bit in like the overall just like overwritten side of this movie, and I feel like this movie has no business. This new Knives Out has no business being 2.5 hours long. Like, that's just nuts. This should be like a 90-minute feature at best. But, Netflix, man, they will allow filmmakers to do what they want to do. And to a lot of people, that's music to their ears. But to me, I just am constantly seeing a lot of like the better filmmakers working today. I don't really consider Johnson one of them, but he's very popular. But I feel like they're putting out their worst stuff through the studio because there's just no sense of editorial control. Anyway, I thought that this thing was a bust, but I'm going to be on my own there, I'm sure. Whatever. On to day 4. Up bright and early to see a movie called Rental Family. I think I might have a stomach bug, so that's fun. But, well, this is how it works. Hour lineup while you're probably sick. I'm about to leave Toronto, but I totally didn't get a chance to do yesterday's roundup of movies. So just really quickly, I wanted to talk about those 3. The first of which is Rental Family, which is that Brendan Fraser movie that the director of Beef, Hikari, directed. And it's about a guy who's like a out of work actor. He gets hired by this company that does these kind of like different services for people, like having someone pretend to be your mistress to apologize to your wife, yada yada yada, all these kinds of things. And Brendan Fraser plays this guy who gets hired to pretend to be the father of a girl who's trying to enter into a private school by the mother. And, it's a really sweet movie. I don't think it's like exceptional, but it's one of these films that certainly I think is better on the heartwarming side of things than like something like Coda, which to me feels more cloying and much weaker and much more poorly made. This is, a very simple heartwarmer that I think a lot of people will dig. I think it's, kind of a middle of the pack movie, but one of these things that I enjoyed watching as I watched it. And it was exactly what I needed in that moment because I was just like exhausted from a pretty bad previous day at TIFF. Then after that, we watched Dead Man's Wire, which is the new Gus Van Sant movie. I haven't seen a Van Sant movie since Milk. So if that gives you any indication of like my general sort of like, not disinterest in Van Sant, but just how off my radar he's been. This is Bill Skarsgård and Dr. Montgomery film. I think that was his name. Yeah, the Billy from Stranger Things. Anyway, it's a true crime story about a guy in Indianapolis who kidnaps the son of a mortgage lender giant. Who has felt like he's been totally screwed over by his father's company. So he attaches a dead man's wire to the guy's neck and attaches him at the end of a shotgun and then walks him over to his apartment. And it's like this sort of like Elmore Leonard kind of thing. He ends up becoming kind of like a folk hero a little bit. And it's a really enjoyable movie. I dig these kinds of like stylish, cool vibe crime stories anyway. And so this was right up my alley. And I think Bill Skarsgård gives a really great performance that in some other year with probably better campaigning could actually like go somewhere in terms of like awards bait stuff, but it's just not the right year and it's probably not going to get the campaign it deserves. But he's really fun. It's really funny. And I think it's nice to see Skarsgård do something a little like further afield than like the sort of usual like creepy guy stuff, even though there is a little bit of that too. But yeah, it's a cool movie. And then lastly, we saw a film called The Furious, which here's the log line: a mute man in some unnamed Southeast Asian country. His daughter gets kidnapped by child traffickers, and he goes on a unending mission to get her to reunite with her. And he teams up with a journalist who also his wife has been kidnapped by these his wife, who's also a journalist, has also been kidnapped by these child traffickers in the midst of investigating them. And let me just tell you, both of these guys kick fucking ass. So yeah, this is like the most intense action movie I've seen in a very long time. It's like total martial arts hand-to-hand combat, crazy stunts, amazing fights, and among like some of the best choreographed hand-to-hand stuff that you'll probably ever see. I mean, there's things where like there's scenes where guys are like fighting each other with bicycles, and like there's like arrow fu, which I've never seen in my life. Both of these things, and like just the stunts are just off the charts. And I think that like it's the kind of movie that, you know, it's not going to win like best film awards, but certainly like if it gets released this year, it's the kind of movie that will eventually like win some best stunt prizes. I mean, it reminds me a lot of like old video games like Fatal Fury, or maybe it's more like Final Fight. Yeah, Final Fight, excuse me. Final Fight or Streets of Rage, you know, those kinds of beat 'em ups where there's like all these big characters, you know, there's an arrow guy, there's an afro guy, there's a big bald, the invincible guy, you know, there's like all these superhuman kind of fighters, and The Furious just like plays those tropes to a T. It doesn't really have any like recognizable people outside of maybe Joe Taslim, who you might know from The Raid or that really terrible Mortal Kombat movie that came out a few years ago. He plays the journalist that the main star kind of teams up with. But man, I was like buzzing when I came out of there. And it's probably the best action movie I've ever seen come out of TIFF, much less one of the better action movies that I've seen in a long time in general. So we just don't get a lot of good hand-to-hand fighting films like this. Anyway, that was the end of that day. We made it home. As you can see, I'm back in the library after a pretty good, quick, easy flight. Yeah, we caught one other movie before we left. Actually, technically, we caught 1.5 other movies, or I did. But we did see Hamnet, which is the Chloe Zhao film that kind of fictionalizes. It was an adaptation of the Hamnet book, but it fictionalizes the death of William Shakespeare's second child, or you know, one of William Shakespeare's twins, which was his younger 2 children. And Paul Mescal plays Bill Shakespeare. Jessie Buckley plays Agnes, his wife. And you know, it's advertised to us as like a kind of this major tearjerker, or the kind of movie that like you need to go in with a hanky and be prepared for some deep sadness, particularly for someone that responds quite negatively to depictions of like mortality on screen. I'll say that like I liked this movie. And, you know, I'm a fan of Zhao's. I actually one of the people who thought Eternals was pretty okay. But it definitely stepped down from like her previous movies, which I thought like The Rider was like one of the standout movies of its year when it came out, like 2019 maybe, can't quite remember. And of course Nomadland, which I think is like a lesser version of that same idea, but still quite good. Though, you know, the years have been less kind to it, to be honest with you. And I think if it came out in a year, there wasn't a pandemic. Never mind. Whatever. Stupid. But yeah, this movie is pretty good. I wasn't like as swept away with it as many of my fellow critics were. I think there is like this sort of rising sense amongst my colleagues and my partner's colleagues that this is going to be like one of the sure shot Oscar movies and maybe the Best Picture number one contender, and that might be true. I don't know. I mean, I guess right now, if you held a gun to my head, I'd probably say yes. Hamnet probably going to win Best Picture, but maybe Ryan Coogler's going to win Best Director, or some other, there might be some other angle that happens, because we still have a number of movies that have yet to come out, that have yet to be seen, that are still in that sort of contender space. But my issue with Hamnet, to get to the point, is that like I think the first half is like really immediate, really visceral, and it kind of like spends a lot of time with Agnes at home, meeting Shakespeare. There were this sort of the start of their relationship, the birth of their children, and a lot of like her background, which is very pagan, and she's kind of like this sort of an interesting sort of wild woman archetype, a woman of the forest and a woman that knows all about plants and stuff, and it's kind of an interesting angle on the Bard, which I was not that aware of. But I think the second half of the movie, after sort of like the inevitable occurs, I think we end up with something that's a good deal less interesting and much more ordinary. And we end up sort of decentralizing Agnes, and we kind of shift over to Mescal Shakespeare and like how he is dealing with the events of the film. And there are interesting aspects to that, particularly in the writing of the Hamlet play, which, just to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of that play, but like I think it's one of his lesser works. Still, the sort of the theorizing around like the origin of Hamlet's name, and some of the soliloquies, and how they may have been birthed out of tremendous strife and sorrow is fascinating. I don't know. I feel like that second half of the film really sort of deflates so much of what makes the first half work, and it just kind of becomes much more of a, I don't know, just like your typical biopic swings. I felt like we could have been like just a couple minutes away from like a title card that says, "And now we call it Hamlet." It's just I think that they were like verging that closely to something like that, and I found that very disappointing. But it still doesn't erase what makes the first half work so well. And I still came out largely positive on the film, especially in more conversations with my partner, and some of the, like the clever touches it has. And I do think Mescal is wonderful. Like Jessie Buckley is good in the film, and very strong, and I think she'll probably get most of the praise. But I think Mescal actually gives the stronger of the two performances, which is strange because I think he's centered in the weaker part. But that's cinema for you. It's a weird amalgamation of things. We also saw other movies that Hannah saw a movie called Eternity, but I didn't see it, so I can't speak to it. And then I saw a little bit of a thing called The Silent Friend, but didn't see enough of it to talk about it because I had to go catch a flight. Anyway, that was TIFF. We saw 15 movies. Pretty soon I'll probably do like some kind of video that kind of sums up what my top like 5 movies from TIFF are. Maybe I'll do it as a short and throw it up on TikTok and stuff. But it's a lot of fun. It's a great festival. If you've never been before, I really recommend it. We go, I've gone it the past like 4 years, 5 years now, and it's just been such a great time. 4 years. It's been an amazing time, and hope we get to keep on doing it as long as we can manage it. It's just a real highlight of the year. Anyway, peace. This video is sponsored by me. I have a book out. Do you like short horror stories in the vein of Stephen King? Small town interconnected intrigue a la Ray Bradbury? The narrative weirdness of Gene Wolfe? Then this may be the book for you. Pick up Taking Root by Kyle Pinion today at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and any online book retailer.